This is about MS-13, and we'll have another announcement next week. The left-wing group of people that are running our cities are not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing.
We are going to seek the death penalty against Alexei Sayans, who is a leader in the Eastern District of New York, a leader of MS-13.
For decades, the single biggest obstacle to building a modern transportation system has been the mountains and mountains of bureaucratic red tape in Washington, D.C. We're cutting the federal permitting timeline for a major project from up to 20 years or more, hard to believe, down to 2 years or less.
President Trump in Georgia talking infrastructure and regulations, and then in the White House talking about going after MS-13, that horrible group that has done a lot of damage and murders across the U.S., going after its leader. And the breaking news, as we just reported, the National Association of Police Organizations endorsing President Trump. And just moments ago, its president said they got a call from the president thanking them for the endorsement. Remember, this organization endorsed President Obama, Vice President Biden in 2008, 2012. They didn't make an endorsement in 2016, but the President McHale saying that the president said it was an honor and wanted to let us all know how important this endorsement was to him personally and professionally. Obviously, it comes as efforts to defund police departments all over the country are springing up. Let's bring in our panel. Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief at USA Today, Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen, and Kimberly Strassel, a member of the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal. It seems, Kimberly, that this is significant for the president at this moment when polls show him trailing in key battleground states. The organization of National Police Organization, a significant organization.
Yeah, so this is a function of what we're now seeing as growing unrest and violence. It's one thing to have protests and some civil unrest. This is now turning into a long, hot summer of violence and looting, and it's putting a new spotlight on this question of law and order and rule and law of cities, and the president's embracing that. One thing that I think is interesting about that endorsement is it raises a broader prospect of whether or not the White House has some potential for inroads with union votes, not just among police officers, but firefighters, people who work in infrastructure and fossil fuels, because those are going to be big points and flashpoints of contention in this election.
Here's the governor of Portland talking about recent protests turned violent there.
The street violence in Portland absolutely needs to stop. Trump troops in Portland are definitely not the answer. As we saw, this only escalates the tension.
They're like war zones. And if the city isn't going to straighten it out, if local politicians, all in this case, I don't say this for political reasons, they're all Democrats. They're liberal, left-wing Democrats. And it's almost like they think this is going to be this way forever. We're not going to put up with that.
The governor of Oregon, not the governor of Portland, obviously, but the governor of Oregon talking about Portland there, Susan Page. We should point out that Joe Biden has said publicly as recently as yesterday that he does not support defunding police, but this is an issue in different cities, especially where the violence is continuing.
Well, when we see this chaos in Portland and we see the demonstration, the violent demonstration we saw in New York, this is the ideal backdrop for the campaign theme that President Trump has been striking, that it's a dangerous world and you can't trust Joe Biden to protect your family. And that we saw that in a 30-second TV ad that the Trump campaign put out today. But I think the risk for the president is he is at odds in some way with the kind of the mood of the country when it comes to trying to think about racial justice, which was the spark for these protests. It's not 1968. In a way, it feels a little like he's running a 1968 campaign.
Mark, you know, it was overlooked by a lot of the press today, but that MS-13 announcement that the leader has been captured and they're going after the death penalty, that's a big deal for some states that have been dealing with that gang for a while.
It is. And look, the president is running on law and order. He's always been campaigning, talking about getting tough with MS-13, and now he's talking about getting tough with looters and rioters in these cities. And, you know, and by the way, in Portland, the federal troops, the Trump troops, as the governor called it, are protecting federal buildings because the Portland police aren't doing it. There's been $23 million in damage to businesses in Portland from these riots. This is not small stuff. You know, there's two ways of looking at it, and I'm kind of two minds on it. On one hand, there's an argument to be say, let the cities burn. You know, these people elected feckless Democratic leaders. They were talking about defunding the police. Well, let them live with the consequences of that leadership. And if they don't like it, then they should do what the people in New York did in the 1990s and elect a Rudy Giuliani to clean things up. But on the other hand, the argument is, what about the minority? What about the business owners? What about the people there who you can't just leave them defenseless against mob violence? And the president has a responsibility. You know, $500 million of damage in Minneapolis, because as I said, $23 million in Portland. These people need to be defended, and if their elected leaders won't do it, then it's up to the president to do it.
Meantime, Kimberly, interesting back and forth inside the White House about Dr. Anthony Fauci. Peter Navarro, advisor to the president, in an USA Today op-ed. Dr. Fauci has a good bedside manner with the public, but he's been wrong about everything I have interacted with him on. So when you ask me whether I listen to Dr. Fauci's advice, my answer is only with skepticism and caution. Here's the president, Dr. Fauci, and the vice president today.
He made a statement representing himself. He shouldn't be doing that. No, I have a very good relationship with Anthony.
It is a bit bizarre. I don't really fully understand it. I think they realize now that that was not a prudent thing to do because it's only reflecting negatively on them. I can't explain Peter Navarro. He's in a world by himself.
Tony Fauci is a valued member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. We just completed our latest meeting today, and we couldn't be more grateful for his steady counsel.
And the vice president even putting out a picture of that meeting. Kimberly, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the White House also said that the Navarro piece had not been vetted, didn't go through the usual process, and that seems to have to be the case because, look, in this case, Peter Navarro has not served the White House well. The press and critics have been attempting to cause a rift in the White House over its pandemic response policy and try to suggest that there are issues between Fauci and the president for months now. And so why an advisor of his would actually publish a piece that further stokes that narrative and then require the White House to spend a good portion of the day repairing that damage, it's not serving the president well.
Susan, last word. I mean, Dan Scavino, we mentioned last night, had his own Twitter post about Dr. Fauci, so it's not just Navarro.
Oh, and we think that Peter Navarro is reflecting an attitude that the president has had, but not useful to have it at this moment when his credibility on COVID-19 is low and Dr. Fauci's credibility on that front is really high.